Last Friday, the Marlins did something that no organization has done before in the PitchCom era. They called pitches from the dugout. Yes, this guy, assistant pitching coach Alon Leichman, was sending a sequence of numbers to catcher Liam Hicks, who would then relay it via PitchCom to pitcher Jansen Junk, who would then throw the pitch. Two obvious camps exist on this topic. The old school folks say, take your head out of the numbers, just call the game based on intuition. And then the data heads, new school side, see this as probably around like a 10 or so % efficiency advantage to a staff to optimize usage, in which case, absolutely wheels up. But regardless of what camp you fall into as the viewer, this topic of taking pitch calling to the dugout is a beautiful blend of analytics and the art of analytics and how they mesh and fall together. So in this video, we're going to dig into everything about modeling usage, or at least broach it on the surface and try to circle around whether the Marlins are successful in convincing the rest of the league that this is the way to call pitches. Watch baseball at any point prior to 2022 and you'd see the classic catcher putting fingers down to call a pitch. Now that's all done via PitchCom, a small device that projects audio into the ear of a catcher or around the ear of a pitcher. Both of those methods mean the catcher is the leader. He's obviously in pitcher meetings, hitter meetings, he knows the game plan, he knows the opposing lineup. But as much as you, as a data-minded pitching coach, might try to embed in your catcher's brain that you shouldn't throw a fastball to a certain hitter in a certain spot, he might just hate that his pitcher walked a pair of batters and call a poor pitch from an expected run value standpoint, and it might fly out of the park close to 500 feet. Stuff like that, a catcher kind of going off script for an experiential reason, I imagine this stuff happens all the time. We're just never going to hear about it as the public. The Marlins bet is that the person with the information present in front of them during the pitch calling process will do a better job calling pitches than the catcher who does not have that information in front of them. The catcher and pitcher can still shake. Basically, they can disagree with the pitch caller. We actually saw this in the 9th inning Saturday. Calvin Fauché shook from presumably a breaking ball to a fastball. You could see it right here. And then missed his fastball location, and Kyle Higashioka went yard to make it a one-run game. But the catcher is no longer the one making the 100% skin in the game decision of what to throw in a specific spot. Conceptually, this bet by the Marlins makes a lot of sense to me. Think of it this way. I imagine the Marlins internally are thinking to themselves, hey, we can be about 10% more efficient as a staff by deferring to the model for these pitch calling decisions. Now, if you disagree with the Marlins approach, what you're saying is that the catcher has some intangible skill, repeatable ability to exceed the advantage that the model on its own creates in these individual instances continually, repeatedly over the course of a full season, such that you believe the intangible nature of that catcher is greater than the model itself. And while I think this could be true, the really hard part of it is identifying the catchers that actually have this skill. And even if you've identified 10 of them, or maybe 8, there's another 50 or so in Major League Baseball that aren't going to be demonstrably better than the model. And for the most part, that means a lot more teams should be doing what the Marlins are doing on a regular basis. Now, what goes into this usage model is a great question. Obviously, the Marlins aren't going to make their approach public, but Driveline Baseball has taken a shot at this. A huge thank you to Merrick Milo, Jack Lambert, and Josh Hedgeka for some of the info that's about to come here. What you're trying to do is figure out, given a specific game state, what pitch then moves you to the next best achievable game state. So if it's the first pitch of a game, 0-0 count, nobody on, nobody out. Ideally, you want to generate an out. But yeah, it's pretty hard to get 27 outs on 27 pitches. So if you get to 0-1, that's a pretty good result via maybe a called strike or a whiff. The model is taking in things like your shapes, how those shapes play off your arm angle, basically stuff, and creating a bunch of mini models that say, hey, what's the chance you generate a swing and miss here? What's the chance you generate a called strike? What's the chance you put a ball in the air? It's then considering the value of all of those outcomes and giving you what it thinks should be the distribution of your pitches in that particular spot, given the information present. One of the key things to understand about how this modeling works is that it's not outputting a pitch and then Alon is going, I have to absolutely throw this offering. It's far more of an art on top of data than I think a lot of people who disagree with this being something that the Marlins have adopted believe. The model driveline built is giving you a recommended usage scheme based off that pitcher's stuff and the prediction of expected outcomes that we just talked about. It's saying, for example, if your mix is four-seam, sinker, slider, splitter, and it's the first pitch of the game, that the model recommends, say, 60% fastball, 25% sinker, and 15% slider to a right-handed hitter over a large sample of this situation. The guys at Driveline built a call sheet similar to a football play call sheet, where you can literally just go, okay, here's the count, here's the game state, etc. Boom, here's the usage distribution you should make sure that you're sticking to in that spot. How you get to that 60% four seam, 25% sinker, and 15% slider is ultimately up to the pitch caller. That's the art element of this. I would guess there's somebody else in the Marlins dugout that's also helping with tracking relative to the model and keeping Alone honest if he's showing a tendency that the model thinks is negative expected value for the team. Whereas if you're the catcher making these decisions, it's unlikely you're made totally aware of a bias and what you're using against hitters that could be hurting the pitcher and your pitching staff in the game. Maybe catchers between innings are getting feedback from a pitcher and a pitching coach, but I doubt many teams, or any teams really, have a usage model output in the dugout that they're referencing to guide them through that decision making. I bet the goal of this guide or this model is really just to make sure you're tracking correctly on the balance of fastballs to non-fastballs. And I will say, the funniest thing across the first two games of this for the Marlins is that they're actually throwing more four-seam fastballs. Yes, with their starting pitchers specifically for the first two games, Friday and Saturday, where this was implemented, Jansen Junk and Adam Mazer both threw more four-seam fastballs than they had in their prior 2 months of starts. I say this because among minor league organizations this season, the Marlins have slashed four-seam usage more than anybody else in baseball. They sit at 33% in the minors this year, which is the third lowest. And they've used this pitch calling system the entire season below the major league level. Two of their top pitching prospects, Thomas White and Robbie Snelling, had the entirety of their pitches this season called from the dugout, and they've both been very, very good. The Marlins have also made some improvements in the minor leagues as well, year over year, most notably from a whiff and strikeout minus walk standpoint. They've been able to limit barrels really well, too. Whether that success the Marlins had in the minors ports over 1-to-1 to the major leagues, I imagine a lot of people would be very skeptical of. But given the success they've had in the minors, I think it makes a lot of sense to at least test the idea in the majors and see the results, especially when the games they're playing don't really matter. One thing I deliberately left out in discussing the inputs of the usage model the Marlins are operating on right now through the end of the season and maybe into next year is that it's not building in hitter tendencies or sequencing consideration. It's going heavily off pitcher strengths. What is your best pitch in this spot? The added layer of sequencing and hitter tendencies is applied via the pitch caller, in this case, Alone Leichman, doing advanced work on hitters, using his own experience as a pitcher, etc. The model itself, which is an early vision, I imagine, of the model they aim to use long term, is actually a pretty simple one. So if they're facing a hitter like Adolis Garcia over the weekend who destroys breaking balls and spin in the zone, and the rec in a given spot is a breaking ball, maybe you don't call a breaking ball to Adolis Garcia. But that is Alone's call, not the model bringing all that info in and potentially complicating things. I think a really interesting idea for the Marlins is whether they would consider the person who builds the model actually be the one in the dugout calling pitches, embedded with the pitching staff, understanding all the nuance of how these guys operate, vertically integrated to some extent between R&D all the way to the field level. That is perhaps how you get the most edge out of this idea. And maybe at that point, the model becomes a bit more complex. Instead of just looking at pitcher strengths, it starts to cover things like sequencing information throughout a given game and hitter bat path data. For example, what's the optimal mix against this particular hitter based on his bat path, his tilt, how his bat moves through the zone, historically how he has done versus specific shapes. Or we can also think about the application of decay stuff. This kind of gets into pitch sequencing, and I've mentioned pitch decay a ton on this channel. Say, for example, you've thrown a specific breaking ball 8 or 9 times to a given hitter, and you're now seeing him a 4th time in this game. The expected value of that breaking ball has maybe decreased, so we need to pull down that usage, and the model would bake this into consideration and potentially give the Marlins even more of an edge. Perhaps this requires some kind of in-game update, which would be a really interesting wrinkle if the Marlins are giving a new play call sheet to their pitch caller every inning or so. The more I dug into this topic, the more I liked it, because I think the best teams in baseball are the ones that know when to apply their specific coach feel and anecdotal info and intangible elements of the game on top of the models that they're relying on in a lot of situations to make decisions. I think the worst teams in baseball are the ones that don't use the models at all and think that in every situation they can apply their beliefs and experiential ideas to things and end up plus EV, and that are also not tracking things at all to understand whether those decisions are actually going in the correct direction. It's a beautiful balance of using data, but also having to apply something on top of it. And the oddity is, like, as the models become more complex, I'm not entirely sure if they become substantially more predictive. Maybe it's always good to have the experiential art layer of that pitch caller on top of the model. Perhaps that's eventually what teams do, because if you think it this way, if your model is entirely robotic, right, you have to call this pitch in this particular spot, you can basically, as another team, maybe back into what the pitch calls could be in certain spots. This gets into this whole concept of randomizers. If you've ever played poker and understand the concept of randomizers, it's essentially a way to make decisions in random directions without showing a pattern such that your opponents can't pick up on you. So then you start to layer in another element of whether you want to bake into your model pure randomness, just situations where, okay, we see that they throw 75% plus of this given pitch type in this particular spot versus this particular hitter with this particular pass. But in this spot, we're not going to do that. We're going to throw 4 curveballs in a row to this guy who hits curveballs well. Maybe that's not a perfect example of it, but you could see the layering on top of this modeling. And I imagine this is something the Marlins and maybe other teams who are considering this idea are wondering about. How simple to complex do we want our model to be? And then again, what skills do we want from the pitch caller to layer on top of the model to eventually be successful in game? So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a really cool one to think through conceptually, and I don't fully understand everything that goes into modeling. I'm actually going to try this offseason to learn a bit of Python and play around with these ideas myself so I could do a better job of explaining it. So thank you to everybody who is maybe watching this video that helped me out in understanding some of the nuance of how the modeling works overall. I imagine the Marlins are in a pretty good spot with some of the people they have there from a front office standpoint. And I'm fascinated to see how this idea grows over the years. Take care.